Needless to say, when I finally woke up and took a look at myself, I was shocked. I was twice as tall and older than I was before, and somehow my tunic had been tailored, and I was now wearing undergarments. I assumed that Hyrule got me some new duds, but it soon became clear to me it was the same tunic, taken out for a few sizes. I found out why that was later on. All you need to know right now is that these events get even more confusing. My memory was still fragmented even at this point. Strangely enough, there was always something familiar about Hyrule. Something in his eyes reminded me of a friend. I think at some point I always knew. All of this was still too much to take in at once. I didn't know if I believed what the Deku Tree had told me. My involvement in this adventure was of my own personal desire, but finding out that I had an actual destiny, that I actually was this hero of time, it was overwhelming. Hearing about Ganondorf finally snapped me out of my amazement, and the news was horrifying. Ganondorf had gotten exactly what he wanted, and it was all my fault. Everything became real, so once I had caught my breath, I listened to what Hyrule had to say. There was a plan to deal with it, and regardless of how outmatched I felt, I knew I'd have to take actions to fix all of this. And so, my true adventure began. Admittedly, I didn't know if I could trust Sheik. From what I knew about the Sheikah, Impa could have very well been the last of their kind. So where did this kid come from? I decided that for now I'd assume he was Impa's apprentice. Strangely enough, as cautious as I was about being snuck up on, a strange calm seemed to radiate from Sheik. He had, after all, given me useful information on where I could go to find the sages, and I was certain I had seen the entrance to at least one of them before. But like he said, I couldn't get there without certain tools. When I finally had a moment to myself, I took stock of the items that I had on my person at the time. Strangely enough, this was where I first was able to remember having the lens of truth. I also had the knowledge of the Song of Storms as well. I had no idea where I got those things, and when I tried to think about them, broken memories flashed before me along with a considerable headache, so I didn't press the matter too hard. When I finally left the Temple of Time, I was shocked by what I had to see. Castletown was ruined and overrun with re-deads. I knew I couldn't stay here for long, so I got out as soon as possible, not stopping to look around. The dark clouds from that day had now become a permanent fixture over Castletown. Kakariko Village thankfully seemed to still be intact. Some familiar faces from Castletown were found here. I was glad to see them alive. I tried looking for Impa at her old place, but she still wasn't here. She was at the graveyard, so I went back there to look for her. Unfortunately, the graveyard seemed just as empty as ever. I went to the Gravekeeper for help, only to learn that after all these 7 years, Dampé had died. It was quite unfortunate, as I had heard rumors that he was one of the few people smart enough to flee Hyrule once Ganondorf took over. And yet, according to his will, he requested his remains and his personal effects, including his own treasure, be returned to Hyrule and buried in Kakariko's graveyard. When my memory started working again, I would find out why.
Watch out!
Racing Dampé brought on strange memory fragments like earlier. I didn't understand any of this. Where were these visions coming from? For some reason, I seem to know exactly how to use the hookshot the moment that I received it. I know I was a fast learner, but this seemed to be previously ingrained in me, and yet another brief vision came over me. I had no idea what it meant. I knew that I was meant to awaken the sages, but after seeing everything that had befallen the innocent people of Hyrule, I was of course distracted. After finding Talon and Kakariko, he told me what happened to Lon Lon Ranch. I was worried about Milan, so I went there to see what I could do. The peaceful atmosphere and music in the air was not found in Lon Lon Ranch anymore, now that Ingo had taken over. He had wanted to gain Ganondorf's favor, and that caused him to become cruel and uncaring. I find it ironic that years after working on this farm, he stopped being such a coward. I didn't know how to make him give up ownership of the ranch back to Talon, so all I could do was try to get him to reveal some sort of weakness. I didn't bother listening to his explanation, because thanks to my encounter with Epona 7 years ago, I already knew enough about writing. After looking around the farm, I discovered what had become of Milan. Ingo wasn't necessarily mistreating her, but he had effectively blackmailed her to work for him on the farm, or else he'd abuse the animals. Seeing her reduced to such a sad state renewed my resolve to figure out how to take the ranch back. From what I could gather, Ingo liked making money, and Milan mentioned that he was quite the gambler. He had plans to turn the ranch into a horse track, charge for admission, and allow people to place bets on the races. She mentioned that if someone's horseback skills impressed him, he'd challenge them to a race. I figured that could be what I could use, but the problem is the horse that I used before was so slow. Strangely enough, I seem to have memory fragments of riding Epona, and I knew that she was a far faster horse than that. Epona. And that gave me an idea. The memory fragments returned as I rode Epona, and brought back years of experience riding her that I never knew I had. What was going on with me? Was I even the same person I was 7 years ago? I would learn later after this incident, Ingo was so worried about what Ganondorf would do to him if he found out about this, that he changed his attitude and insisted that Talon be welcomed back as owner of the ranch. A coward to the end. It seemed fairly obvious to me what brought about this change. He'd finally found a way to cope with being second fiddle to Talon, even after all these years. Sheik's warning about the forest got me worried about Saria. Fortunately, I still had a way to contact her.
Listen.
But hearing that she herself went to the forest temple alone had me even more worried. The temples were serving as conduits from the evil realm that allowed Ganondorf's evil army to pour into our world, and Saria could easily be in danger. It was time to stop messing around and return to my home. The nostalgia of being back in the Kokiri Forest was short-lived. The peaceful village was overrun with giant Dekubabas and mad scrubs all over the place. And worse, the Kokiri were all forced to shelter inside. But what was even more shocking was when I saw them in person. Everyone I knew from my childhood hadn't changed at all, despite the fact that I was now a grown man. They were all still children. What was going on here? What was scary was they didn't recognize me. Oh, I was familiar to them, but they didn't realize that it was me. Something was wrong. I was beginning to realize after all this time, I really wasn't one of them. But I was still overcome with rage against Ganondorf that he had done all of this. This was still my home, and I would take it back.